Ludwig van Beethoven was a German composer and pianist. Beethoven remains one of the most admired composers in the history of Western music. His works rank amongst the most performed of the classical music repertoire and span the transition from the classical period to the Romantic era in classical music. He was born on December 17, 770 and died in March 26, 1827. Widely regarded as the greatest composer who ever lived, Ludwig van Beethoven dominates a period of musical history as no one else before or since, rooted in the classical traditions of Joseph Haydn and Mozart. His art reaches out to encompass the new spirit of humanism and incipient nationalism, expressed in the works of Goethe and Friedrich von Schiller. His elder contemporaries in the world of literature thus stringently redefined moral imperatives of Kant and the ideals of the French Revolution with its passionate concern for the freedom and dignity of the individual. He revealed more vividly than any of his predecessors the power of music to convey a philosophy of life. Without the aid of a spoken text, and it's certain of his compositions is to be found the strongest assertion of the human will. In all music, if not in all art, though not himself a romantic, he became the fountainhead of much that characterized the work of the Romantics, who followed him especially in his ideal program or illustrative music, which he defined in connection with his Sixth Pastoral Symphony as more an expressions of emotion than painting. In musical form, he was a considerable innovator, widening the scope of sonata, symphony, concerto, and quartet. While in the Ninth Symphony, he combined the worlds of vocal and instrumental music in a manner never before attempted. His personal life was marked by heroic struggle against encroaching weakness, and some of his most important works were composed during the last 10 years of his life when he was quite unable to hear. Life and work, the early years. Beethoven was the eldest surviving child of Johann and Maria Magdalena van Beethoven. The family was Flemish in the origin and can be traced back to Malines. It was Beethoven's grandfather who had first settled in Bonn when he became a singer in the choir of Archbishop Elector of Cologne. He eventually rose to become Kapellmeister. His son Johann was also a singer in electoral choir. Thus, like most 18th century musicians, Beethoven was born into the profession. Though at first quite prosperous, the Beethoven family became steadily poorer. With the death of his grandfather in 1773 and the decline of his father into alcoholism, by age 11, Beethoven had to leave school. At 18, he was the breadwinner of the family. Having observed in his eldest son the signs of a talent for the piano, Johann tried to make Ludwig a child prodigy, like Mozart, but did not succeed. It was not until his adolescence that Beethoven began to attract mild attention. When in 1780, Joseph II became sole ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, he appointed his brother Maximilian Francis as adjutant and successor designate to Archbishop Elector of Cologne. Under Maximilian's rule, Bonn was transformed from a minor provincial town into a thriving and cultured capital city. A liberal Roman Catholic, he endowed Bonn the university, limited the power of his own clergy, and opened the city to the full tide of the German literary Renaissance associated with Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock, and the young Goethe and Schiller. A sign of the times was the nomination as court organist of Christian Gottlob Wincke and Protestant from Saxony, who became Beethoven's teacher, although somewhat limited as a musician. Nitti was nonetheless a man of high ideals and wide culture, a man of letters as well as a composer of songs and light theatrical pieces. And it was to be through Nitti that Beethoven in 1783 would have his first extant composition, Nine Variations on a March by Destiny, published at Mannheim by June 17, 1882. Beethoven had become Nippi's assistant as court organist. For the next 5 years, Beethoven remained at Bonn. To his other court duties was added that of playing viola in the theater orchestra, and although the Archbishop for the time being showed him no further mark of special favor, he was beginning to make valuable acquaintances. Sometime previously he had come to know the widow of the Chancellor, Joseph von Breuning, and she engaged him as music teacher to two of her 4 children. From then on, the Breunings' house became for him a second home, far more congenial than his own. Through Mlle von Breuning, Beethoven acquired a number of wealthy pupils. His most useful social contact came in 1788 with the arrival in Bonn of Ferdinand Graf Count von Waldstein, a member of the highest Venice aristocracy and a music lover. Wildstein became a member of the Breuning circle, where he heard Beethoven play and at once became his devoted admirer. At a fancy dress ball given in 1790, the ballet music, according to the Almanach de Gotha, a journal connecting the social activities of the aristocracy, had been composed by the Count, but it was generally known that Beethoven had written it for him. The same year saw the death of the Emperor Joseph II through Wildstein again. Beethoven was invited to compose a funeral ode for soloists, chorus, and orchestra. But the scheduled performance was cancelled because the wind players found certain passages too difficult. He then added to it a complimentary piece celebrating the accession of Joseph's brother, Leopold II. There is no record that either was ever performed until the end of the 19th century, when the manuscripts were rediscovered in Vienna and pronounced authentic by Johannes Brahms. But in 1790, another great composer had seen and admired them. That year, Haydn, passing through Bonn on his way to London, was fitted by the Elector and his musical establishment, when Joseph's brother, Leopold II. There is no record that either was ever performed until the end of the 19th century, when the manuscripts were rediscovered in Vienna and pronounced authentic by Johannes Brahms. But in 1790, another great composer had seen and admired them. That year, Haydn, passing through Bonn on his way to London, was fitted by the Elector and his musical establishment. When shown Beethoven's scores, he was sufficiently impressed by it to offer to take Beethoven as a pupil. When he returned from London, Beethoven accepted Haydn's offer, and in the autumn of 1792, while the armies of the French Revolution were storming into the Rhineland provinces, Beethoven left Bonn, never returned. The album that he took with him, preserved in the Beethoven House in Bonn, indicates the wide circle of his acquaintances and friends in Bonn. The most prophetic of the entries written shortly after Mozart's death. The compositions belonging to the years at Bonn, excluding those probably begun at Bonn but revised and completed in Vienna, are of more interest to the Beethoven student than to the ordinary music lover. They show the influences in which his art was rooted, as well as the natural difficulties that he had to overcome and that his early training was inadequate to remedy. Three piano sonatas written in 1783 demonstrate that musically Bonn was an outpost of Mannheim, that the cradle of the modern orchestra in Germany, and the nursery of a musical style that was to make a vital contribution to the classical symphony. But at the time of Beethoven's childhood, the Mannheim school was already in decline. The once famous orchestra was in effect dissolved after the War of 1778 between Austria and Prussia. The Mannheim style had degenerated into Mannerism. This particular influence is reflected in the preoccupation with extreme piano, soft, and forte or loud, often deployed in the contradiction to the musical praising that may be found in Beethoven's early sonatas and in much else written by him at that time, which is not surprising since the symphonies of the later Mannheim composers formed the staple fare of the Bonn Court Orchestra. But what was only an occasional effect for Mozart and other influenced by the Mannheim composers was to remain a fundamental element for Beethoven. The sudden pianist, the unexpected outburst, the wild leaping arpeggio figures with concluding explosive effects known as Mannheim rockets. All these are central to Beethoven's musical personality and were to help him toward the liberation of instrumental music from its dependence on vocal style. Beethoven may indeed be described as the last and finest flower on the Mannheim tree. And this is the life story of Beethoven.
Franz Joseph Haydn is an Australian composer of the classical period. He was born on March 31, 1732 and died on March 31, 1809. Haydn was the second son of humble parents. His father was a wheelwright. His mother, before her marriage, is a cook for the lords of the village. Haydn early revealed unusual music gifts, and a cousin who was a school principal and choir master in the nearby city of Hainburg offered to take him into his home and train him. Haydn, not yet 6 years old, left home, never to return to parental cottage except for rare brief visits. The young Haydn sang in the church choir. Haydn stayed only briefly with von Morsen, as financial difficulties forced his patron to dismiss the orchestra. Soon, Haydn was invited to enter the service of Principal Antal Esterházy. The Esterházys were one of the most wealthiest and most influential families of the Austrian Empire and boast as a distinguished record of supporting music. Principal Antal had a well-appointed orchestra performing regularly in his castle at Eisenstadt, a small town some 30 miles from Vienna. Because his aged music director was ailing, the prince appointed the relatively unknown Haydn to be assistant conductor in 1761, while the music director oversaw church music. Haydn conducted the orchestra and coached the singers in almost daily rehearsal. Haydn composed most of the music required and served as a chief of the musical personnel. Haydn carried out of his duties extremely well and revealed good nature and skills in dealing with people from his first symphonies written for the Esterházys. Haydn displayed and characteristics good humor and wit, as well as the dependable freshness of his musical ideas, although full maturity would come much later. His employment by the Esterházys family proved decisive for his career, and he remained in their service until his death.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, baptized as Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart, was born on January 27, 1576, in Salzburg. died at December 5, 1791, in Vienna, was an Austrian composer widely recognized as one of the greatest composers in the history of Western music. With Haydn and Beethoven, he brought to its height the achievement of the Viennese classical school, unlike any other composer in musical history. He wrote in all the musical genres of his day and excelled in every one. His taste, his command of form, and his range of expression have made him seem the most universal of all composers. Yet, it may also be said that his music was written to accommodate the specific taste of particular audiences. Mozart most commonly called himself Wolfgang Amadeus or Wolfgang. His father Leopold came from a family of good standing, which included architects and bookbinders. Leopold was the author of a famous violin-playing manual, which was published in the very year of Mozart's birth. His mother Anna Maria was born of a middle-class family, active in local administration. Mozart and his sister Maria Anna were the only two of their 7 children to survive. The boy's early talent for music was remarkable. At 3, he was picking out chords on the harpsichord. At 4, playing short pieces. At 5, composing. There are anecdotes about his precise memory of pitch, about his scribbling a concerto at the age of 5, and about his gentleness and sensitivity. Just before he was 6, his father took him and another also highly talented Dominique to play at the Bavarian court, and a few months later they went to Vienna and were heard at the imperial court and in noble houses. In his early maturity, more symphonies and divertimentos as well as a mass followed during the summer of 1773, then Leopold, doubtless seeking again a better situation for his son in the Salzburg court, was likely to offer to take him to Vienna. No position materialized, but Mozart's contact with the newest Viennese music seems to have had a considerable effect on him. He produced a set of 6 strings quartets in the capital, showing in them his knowledge of Haydn's recent Opus 20 and his fuller texture and more intellectual approach to the medium. Soon after his return, he wrote a group of symphonies, including 2 that represents a new level of achievement, the Little G minor, and a major also dating from this time was Mozart's first true piano concerto in Vienna in the early years. Fresh from his triumphs in Munich, where he had mixed freely with noblemen, Mozart now found himself placed at table in the lodgings for the Archbishop in Torridge, before the valets, if above the cooks. Furthermore, the Archbishop refused him permission to play at concerts. He was resentful and insulted matters came to a head at an interview with Archbishop Colleredo, who according to Mozart used an ecclesiastical language. Mozart requested his discharge, which was eventually granted at a stormy meeting with the court steward on June 9, 1781. Mozart, who now went to live with his old friends, the Weavers, set about earning a living in Vienna. Although eager for a court appointment, he for the moment was concerned to take on some pupils to write music for publication and to play in concerts. In the summer of 1781, rumors began to circulate as far as Salzburg that Mozart was contemplating marriage with the third of the Weaver daughters, Constance, but he hotly denied them in a letter to his father. I have never thought less of getting married. Besides, I'm not even in love with her. He moved lodgings to Scotch the gossip, but by December he was asking for his father's blessing on a marriage with Constance, with whom he was now in love and to whom, probably through the machinations of her mother and her guardian, it was in some degree committed, because Constanza later destroyed Leopold's letters, for reasons that are easy to imagine. Only one side of the correspondence exists. Leopold's reaction can, however, be readily inferred, and it would seem that his period marked a low point in the relationship between father and son. Mozart's place. At the time of his death, Mozart was widely regarded not only as the greatest composer of the time, but also as a bold, difficult one. Don Giovanni especially was seen as complex and dissonant, and his chamber music as calling for outstanding skill in its interpreters. His surviving manuscripts, which included many unpublished works, were mostly sold by Constanze to the firm of André in Offenbach, which issued editions during the 19th century. But Mozart's reputation was such that even before the end of the 18th century, two firms had embarked on substantial collected editions of his music. Important biographies appeared in 1798 and 1828, the latter by Constance's second husband. The first scholarly biography, by Oro Jan, was issued on Mozart's centenary in 1856. The first edition of the Kochel catalog followed 6 years later, and the first complete edition of his music began in 1877. The works most secure in the repertory during the 19th century were the three operas least susceptible to changes in public tastes. The works most secure in the orchestral works closest in spirit to the Romantic era, the minor key piano concertos, and the last three symphonies. It was only in the 20th century that Mozart's music began to be re-examined more broadly. Although up to the middle of the century, Mozart was still widely regarded as having been surpassed in most respects by Beethoven. With the increased historical perspective of the latter 20th century, he came to be seen as an artist of a formidable, indeed, perhaps unequaled, expressive range. The traditional image of the child prodigy turned refined drawing room composer, who could miraculously conceive an entire work in his head before setting pen to paper, gave way to the image of the serious and painstaking creative artist with acute human insight, whose complex psychology demanded exploration by writers, historians, and scholars. The 1980 play Amadeus, and especially its film version of 1984, although they did much to promote interest in Mozart, reinforced certain myths, etc., that even as an adult, Mozart remained an inappropriately childish vessel for divinely inspired music, and that his premature death was brought about by salary. Yet even in this indulgent appropriation of Mozart, his full-blooded humanity at times emerges with haunting vividness. And that is the life story of three famous composers in the classical period era.